Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's Brian, Miss Berlin, and Mr. Betcher for Breaking Down Security.
Hey.
Hello.
Yeah, so for those of you who listen to the show avidly, apologize for the break. Last week was very hectic for me personally and for our organizers because Infosec Campout finally happened, which was great. We sold out all of our spots. And here comes my cat. And we had a lot of good talks, a lot of good discussion, and everybody seemed to have a great time camping. So, and the weather was just phenomenal for doing that. So,
that was awesome.
Yeah. There was
You'll do it again.
Yes. Every conference has their little dark spot. We had a little bit of that on Twitter, which I wasn't going to feed any trolls there. But yeah, I think it was overwhelmingly positive, and we've definitely learned some things. And I have a greater respect for Dave Kennedy and anybody who puts on a conference because, it's easy to sit back and armchair quarterback when I would have done it this way, I would have done it that way. You're not in those shoes, so you don't really know. So next time you criticize a conference, maybe you stop and shut up and think for a minute. So, yeah. So, a lot of stuff coming up next week. We're actually going to be at Derbycon. We have a pizza party, so we'll have a link in the show notes to where you can still sign up for that. We have about 30 people coming to that and room for 20 more, and it's going to be in the Mental Health Village, which I'm going to let Ms. Berlin talk about.
Oh, no. Oh, wait. Brian wants something.
So who's cooking the pizza?
Spinelli's. We're going to have Spinelli's do it like they did last year.
Okay, I'll be there.
It turned out so well.
Wait.
How many plus ones do I get?
2. You get 2. That's it.
That's it?
And Mr. Betcher, were you not going to come if I would have told you it was Pizza Hut or something?
That could be a fair statement.
Oh. I know where you're sleeping for the next week.
I just,
Yeah.
wouldn't have a smile on my face.
Oh, that's cool. All right. So, Ms. Berlin, let's talk a little bit real quick about the Mental Health Hacker Village and what's going on.
So my
there.
next week is insane.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So I'm actually flying to Denver one way on Sunday to pick up a friend and drive him and his cat back.
Okay.
And then pick up somebody else in the Detroit airport and then drive to Louisville.
You're doing things the hard way.
Yeah, I don't know why.
Yeah.
But yeah, so This hopefully is like the best mental health village ever. We were able to, with awesome sponsors and the people that are donating to buy Derby tickets and Patreon supporters and everybody else, we can afford to pay for 3 massage therapists for 2 full days.
Nice.
Yeah, which is like a little bit over $4,000.
Good Lord.
Yeah. All of our board members will be there, other than the board member that we just announced the other day. So yep. Tom Williams is now our director of veteran ops.
Oh, fantastic.
So now we have 7 board members.
Okay.
And I'm going to have some extra special things in the village also that we didn't have last year. But we have a full talk lineup. Like we had to do an actual CFP process we had 6 different people on our review board because there was almost 40 talks submitted.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yes.
it's a snowball rolling downhill,
Yeah. And so this is our first year anniversary and I'm really, really super excited. I can't talk about that. I'm going to be doing some special things at Derbycon. I am speaking twice.
Wow.
And doing an interview. So
that's amazing.
Hope to kind of give a recap of what our year has been so far, like how much funding we've gotten, all the different people that have helped us along the way, and kind of just a recap because it's been a very, very busy year.
Nice. So we're gonna go ahead and get started because our guests are in very I would say not stable areas. One's at a customer site and the other one's in a hotel lobby in Anaheim, California. So the one last thing I will say is we're at the pizza party at Derbycon. We will be doing a podcast show. So Mr. Betcher, Ms. Berlin, please pack your microphones because we're going to need to
just use yours.
No.
I have too much shit already.
What? All right. I mean,
I'll bring it.
Okay,
Fine.
cool. All right, awesome. So, I'll announce our friend of the show last because he's awesome, and invite the new person on the show, Aaron Small. Welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, okay. Hi. My name is Aaron Small. I've been working on information security type things for a handful of years. I spent some time back in Microsoft working on their fraud defense and their identity system. And most recently, I've been doing this Google thing and working on Kubernetes and Kubernetes Engine. And most recently, I helped run the Kubernetes first third-party open source security audit,
Cool.
Which was, I think, what you want to talk to me about?
Yes. And then,
Nice.
yep. And then, of course, a friend of the show has been on several times. We've actually had him on earlier this year to talk about Kubernetes security and how, to do some Kubernetes securing. And he was talking about his vulnerable by design Kubernetes environment. Jay Beale from Inguardians, welcome back, sir.
Hi, thanks a lot. Happy to be here. Yeah, Bust-a-Kube. We got awesome stickers we got to pass out at DEFCON all over the place, and I got to co-lead with Aaron and a couple other folks, the working group that did this first security audit.
Cool. All right. So you say first security audit. First, the major players in this was Jay. I wasn't sure how your company worked with this. Did they just invite you to come on as part of this, or would how did the relationship work?
So to be honest, I'm the one of the four leads for the working group who wasn't appointed. Aaron, do you want to tell that story?
He might be muted. It's going to be
He
fun.
might be muted. Either that or he's just sighing.
Yeah.
So Aaron Small, who's here from Google, who was a product manager for GKE, and has had a lot of influence and expertise in Kubernetes, especially coming from what I think of as the canonical managed Kubernetes environment with GKE, and Joel Smith, who's on the product security team in Kubernetes and works over at Red Hat, and then Craig Ingram, who's at Heroku/Salesforce. Joel and Aaron were first appointed, and Craig filled in when we had Jess Frizzell was the other person beyond Aaron and Joel, and so Craig took Jess Frizzell's spot. I actually didn't understand how the Kubernetes project worked in terms of working groups. So I saw there were some working groups that I was interested in. This was one of the two, and I just showed up in their meetings and asked if I could participate.
Oh.
And it worked out really well. So I got to participate. It was and had a really great experience. So and what it was. So it was, yeah, I guess that's how I got involved. While I'm the Inguardians CTO, it wasn't so much that Inguardians or Heroku or Google or Red Hat in particular were invited. It's more of a Kubernetes project thing. And so while the people who were appointed may have the places they work and the roles they fill there are of course estimable of high esteem. I think they were appointed for what they were doing on the project already.
Right. So this reads like the Ocean's 11 of pen tests. I mean, we got some heavy hitters in Trail of Bits and Atreides Partners, Google, Heroku, Salesforce. And Guardians. None of these folks are lightweights in the security community. So, Aaron, what how did this audit come about? Because Jay said you're the product manager at GKE. Was this where did the idea come from for doing this test? Are you still muted? Yes, you are. No, you're not. We're having some issues. He's actually sitting in a hotel lobby in Anaheim, dealing with a lot of this. So, all right. Well, we'll get back to him eventually. Jay, how did this come about? Did they have any good reason of why this needed to be done? I mean, it's not like they've got Kubernetes, vulnerabilities left and right. It's not the WordPress of the world, is it?
It sure isn't. To be honest, there were plenty of findings on the audit. There was the audit produced a whole bunch of material. It produced a pair of white papers, a vulnerability report, and a threat model. And I would say honestly that I am guessing at the reasons, and yet what I would say is I think this audit came about because Kubernetes is becoming an incredibly important piece of to call it software is almost is an understatement, right? It's this incredibly important piece of software because it's the way I think of it is as a software-defined data center. So you're watching the major hypervisor vendors and cloud providers get very strongly into Kubernetes. This is where so much of development is going, is into a cloud native model. And that's a really rich ecosystem. If you look at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, the CNCF's website, and look at all of the projects that they're supporting or tracking in this ecosystem, you think about Kubernetes, but you see that there's just a freaking ton. And so I think the audit just came out of this is some really important code, and it should get looked at.
Right. Aaron, you're back with us?
Yeah, I've decided to go old school. I'm using a telephone.
That's fine. Wait, you mean like a payphone kind of thing? Please insert 25 cents now. No, I'm just kidding. So I'm using my cell phone as a telephone, which I don't really ever do. Wow. Wow. Okay. That's awesome. So we just asked Jay how the audit came about. Did you have anything you'd like to add to that as part of being part of the Google contingency?
Only to say that the CNCF has been trying to really push the maturity of the products, and they have this graduation model that they've been refining over time. And I don't think, strictly speaking, going through an open source audit is technically part of graduation, but it's the effort is there to build maturity. Mm-hmm. And these products that at one point were like the cool shiny thing that if you were going to build a tech stack and you were new and you were hipster, you would use, and now like whole billion-dollar industries are running on. And so, I think it's a little bit tied to the maturity model that they're trying to build.
Awesome. Okay. So the report. So Jay said that there was a white paper which we have in our show notes for this. Let's talk about some of the scope. Why was the scope picked like it was, and what was it in specific order? Because I have, let me see, what do I have in terms of scope? I have, you started out with the network stack, cryptography, auth in, auth z, RBAC, secrets, namespace traversals, and namespace claims. Was there any specific order or priority you wanted to give this audit this time around?
Well, actually, I thought of that list more as a way to scope it down, not as a way to prioritize the objects we wanted them to look at. Mm-hmm. Like, Kubernetes is huge. And at the time that we started trying to scope the audit, I've been working on it for a year or so already at Google specifically. And these were the places that I kept seeing people making security assumptions, saying, I can trust that if I put these two things in different namespaces that they won't be able to traverse. I can trust that the authentication is valid. I can trust that the authorization system is trustworthy. So I just wanted to capture the places where I know people are trying to make security claims and look at them without some kind of scoping down. This audit would have been massive. In fact, almost everything that we did as far as guidance and leadership over the audit was designed to scope it down, not up.
Right.
Jay, do you have anything you want to add? Does that sound about right?
Yeah, it really does. And honestly, that was one of the things that, our conversations, particularly with Trail of Bits afterwards, was with Stefan at Trail of Bits was if we hadn't done that, and a lot of that prioritization was definitely Aaron's work. If we hadn't done that, they just never would have been able to get anywhere near the level of depth they did. And that's, I guess, the only other thing I'd add is the way I think that everybody on the working group is very much hoping and expecting that this is the first public audit and not the last. Because there's, as Aaron said, he scoped it, he worked pretty hard to scope it down and to get us some focus so we could have depth.
Right. Okay. I don't want to ask all the questions myself. Ms. Berlin, Mr. Bretcher, do you have anything?
I do, but it's when we start talking about the different vulnerabilities.
Okay.
You want to go deep on individual findings. I'm glad Jay came with me.
It was a very broad question. Don't worry.
So I noticed that the Kubernetes GitHub page also has a bug bounty, and I wondered if perhaps this was come out of like issues you guys had found or that others had found with regards to the security. Did the bug bounty happen after the security thing, or was it a before thing? And why is the bug bounty in place if you guys are doing the security audit? Doesn't that find a bunch of bugs that somebody else could have profited off of?
Well, the bug bounty program got kicked off well before the security audit was even a twinkle in the CNCF's eye. It's just kind of moving at a little bit of a slower pace. I don't even think it's open to the public yet. I could be wrong. Someone can correct me if I am. It is also, bug bounties are unstructured, and the quality of the bugs you get is also unstructured and unpredictable. And as like people are trying to say, let's build our enterprise apps on top of Kubernetes, I don't think that saying, hey, we've got a bug bounty is going to have the same level of clout as saying we run security audits on the regular. Here's the last few reports, and here's the vulns they found, and here's how we mitigated them. But that doesn't mean I don't think the bug bounty is a really important program. If someone is going to go hack on Kubernetes, and I'm hoping that all the buzz around the audit and all the conversations we're having will inspire more people to go look at Kubernetes and find bugs, like they should get paid, right? Even if they're not actually working on the audit through the working group with the CNCF or with Trail of Bits or Atreides or whoever we hire next time to do it, right?
Right. Okay.
And I think that, I'll add to that. I think that if you look at the reports, if you look at what came out of this work, it'll give you a sense for places that got a ton of coverage. It'll also give you a sense for places that didn't. And to be honest, I think there are even some decent hints in the reports about areas that you might try to see, okay, can I chain this vulnerability that was found with something else to get something juicier? So.
Right.
The threat model straight points to components and says which pieces of them are insufficient. So yeah, there's hints, there's pointers. Go forth and find bugs.
Yep. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the threat assessment, because when I was reading through the white paper, one of the things that came up was the type of threat assessment you used. It wasn't, there's I know of three. There's the Robert Hurlbut method. There's the Adam Shostak method, which, to be honest, both of those kind of, there's a lot of similarities between those. Leviathan has developed something similar. And then there's this fourth one that came up called Rapid Risk Assessment from Mozilla. And, it highlights the fact that it's quick. It takes 30 to 60 minutes maximum, very high level. These are the positive points. It's concise and readable, easy to update, informative, and lets you know what to do. For a system that's complex as Kubernetes, why did you pick something that seems to be very simple and quick and, very high level instead of getting down into the weeds?
Well, actually, when we started the process, I had been pushing for the Shostak model. And part of that probably is tied into where I come from and how many hundreds of them I've done myself in the past.
Mm-hmm.
But in talking to Stefan at Trail of Bits, actually, he changed my mind. And one of the reasons actually is because it's so complicated. And also the expertise is so distributed. So even with the rapid risk assessments, we still had that component of the audit drag on weeks and weeks past when we thought we would be done, just because we had to get people from all different companies and who have started working there and now are elsewhere. And like, well, so-and-so wrote this part, so he should be in the meeting. And hey, Joel, can you go ping this guy at Red Hat because we need him to talk about this. Who's it? But we got a bunch of people together to go through the rapid risk assessments, and having Stefan come like lead those conversations. I think Jay and myself attended a few of them as well, just to have it be structured and fast and lightweight. Once we did get everyone engaged, was incredibly useful. And then on the back end of that, maybe the rapid risk assessments, the raw data we harvested is quick and lightweight. I would say the threat assessment itself that was generated along with the expertise that was created over the course of the audit isn't really that high level. I think that we do go into a fair amount of depth as to which components are. Go ahead and interrupt me, Jay.
Oh, sure. I think there are some, I think what was produced, even if the model might have been lighter weight, I think there was some serious advantage in not getting too stuck in the weeds, but it produced, the threat model paper is 55 pages. I did a strong tech edit on that document, and it took quite a while. It took quite a while, and there was quite a bit that came out. Aaron was on a lot more of those meetings than I was, but I got to attend some, and they were. It was some real effort. So it produced quite a bit, and I think it got good depth. I think if you look through the findings that came out of that, there's some overlap. There's some overlap with the ones in the main report, but there's just a lot of good coverage. And I mean, I did a reread just to prepare for this interview, and had to take some serious notes in my yellow highlighter to it. So I'm almost afraid to understand how much time it might have taken under a different model.
Okay. So
that's not to say that I would be opposed to having a Showstack or Leviathan style model come in and really go deep on it. That sounds like a great idea. I don't think it would have been a great idea for the first pass, though.
Right.
You'll end up having a novel.
Yeah.
Well, if you think about it, the effort produced four documents, none of which are short. So I mean, I think in a lot of ways the first pass was even as much as it was downscoped. The first pass still was being pretty darn broad that way. Okay. So I mean, I would hope if you guys did that kind of. If there was a threat model, that's its own engagement that's not coupled with a white paper and a code review at the same time.
Right. So according to this, the components standalone binaries written in Go language. The Go language, not Golang or anything like that. The components were Kube API server, RESTful server, coordinating all aspects of the cluster, etcd, Kube scheduler, Kube controller manager, cloud controller manager, kubelets, Kube proxy, and the container runtime. So that does sound like there's a lot there going on. So you said this was more of a. Would you say it was more of an inch deep in some places and a mile wide, and about a mile deep and an inch wide? I mean, what were there any places that you wished you'd gotten to that you didn't get to in this engagement?
I think we were pretty consistently deep. I mean, for the threat model, we definitely scoped to individual components because. Right. If we just picked random Go files, it would take forever. For the code review, there was a red team component to it. We put everything in scope that's in scope for the bug bounty. We only excluded things that weren't in the Kubernetes project. So like individual CNI implementations weren't in scope, for example, but the CNI API was. And we let the vendors say, go forth and find the bugs and find them where you find them. We didn't try and keep that level, so to speak, or balanced across various components. But on the threat modeling side, we did try and pick where we thought we really wanted to go deep, the critical components, if you will. Okay. And I think we covered them pretty well.
Cool. Did you find that certain things were lacking when you were doing the interviews? Because I noticed something about questionnaires were sent out. Documentation was obviously looked at. Did you find that there were, not just findings security-wise, but like there was some missing documentation, or there was some tribal knowledge that should have, that should be, logged somewhere, or was it fairly well documented all around?
Well, the rapid risk assessment process is more targeted on capturing tribal knowledge than on ensuring that the tribal knowledge lines up well with the docs that are published. To be honest, I haven't read all the Kubernetes docs, and I wouldn't be able to give you an honest comparison.
Sure.
I mostly use them as references. But I will say that the way that the interviews got ran was very much like, tell me what you are pretty sure I need to know, but don't ask the right questions, along with the structured nature of walking through rapid risk assessment. And some people, I'll call out Tim Hawkins specifically, was like, man, I would love to just talk about networking with you for an hour, and then why don't you help me narrow in on where things are going to get dicey? And that interview was really spectacular. Sure. I think we got a lot of tribal knowledge out of him. And I'll also give a shout out to Stefan, who was running these, because he did a ton of prep work by digging through the docs, by digging through the code to ask really good questions. I know I didn't answer your question, but that was my experience there.
No, that's
Jay,
cool.
do you have anything?
No, I think that's pretty right on. The one thing I wanted to name was just to give everybody who's listening an idea of lines of code and languages. Kubernetes is about 1.5 million lines of Go, but it's also about 26,000 lines of shell script, and there's also Python in there, there's Ruby in there, and so on. So I'm just want everyone to get a sense for the sheer scale of what we're dealing with. I really liked the choices that were made, going for a ton of depth in the right places instead of a ton of breadth. I mean, I think, Brian, I know that you're a consultant too. I've been on a whole ton of engagements where everyone's throwing the kitchen sink in on breadth. And so you're just struggling to get any real depth. And we got to have quite the opposite. And I was really blown away also just by how generous people on the project were with their time, doing these meetings. So
cool.
Yeah, we didn't get, unlike maybe in larger companies, we didn't really get pawned off to people's deputies.
Cool. Okay.
What were some of the?
That actually we should give some of that credit to the CNCF for how they structured this. They built a working group out of people who have run a ton of audits and are comfortable with what it is like to get vendors in and run an audit. And then having Jay turn up, uninvited. I'm pretty sure he told that story.
I
did. And then and just add that other perspective, that vendor perspective was incredible. I think the working group was set up to really enable the vendors to do a great job and to build the connections between the Kubernetes project and the experts there and the vendors. And that was kind of the way that the Kubernetes project and the CNCF structured it that worked really, really well.
Right. Mr. Betcher, you had a question?
Yeah. What were some of the critical components you guys focused on, like the maybe the heaviest hitter? And what was that?
I think Kubelit's probably the heaviest hitter in all of Kubernetes, right? Mm-hmm. The node agent that runs on every component.
Yeah, I mean the other two really, really big ones for me would be the API server. The kubelet and the API server are basically the things that are the parts that are getting and making tons of those REST API calls to do things. the other one for me is the etcd server, and that got some decent look and had some decent findings come out of it.
Right.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Nice. Okay. So let me see.
That was one of my questions. You took it, Brian. I had another one about a specific finding that I did tell you I wasn't going to ask a specific finding question, but I have one anyways.
No, go ahead.
So there was one in here that said there's output encoding on JSON construction might lead to further work as JSON can get written to logs that may be consumed elsewhere. How is can you explain that a little bit more? Like how would that include further work if that JSON just got shipped somewhere else?
Sure, I can help.
Jay, do you have that finding in front of you? Awesome,
yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, I do. I absolutely do. And I was, I've actually got that one, and I'll throw a link to the to where we log that in GitHub in the show notes. So that one, the exploit scenario that they recorded was that suppose a user in the organization is attempting to add an RBAC permission that they're not entitled to, and that causes the entire RBAC construction to get written out to the logs. And if that gets written out of the logs without being properly encoded, it could then get consumed by something else. And so what they were saying all over the place, what Trail of Bits here was saying all over the place is just like in web apps, we're constantly talking about, like, are you making sure that everything that you put on the screen that isn't JavaScript, that isn't active code, that isn't HTML, is getting encoded so that it won't be interpreted as such. And that was the issue they were finding, was like, hey, you're not building your JSON very well. And they gave an example that I'm staring at right now where the JSON construction isn't going and taking some things and marshalling them or what have you. It's just going and saying, oh, I'm going to take an open bracket and throw some strings in separated by comma space, and then throw a closed bracket on the other end of it, which is basically the most janky thing that you can imagine.
All right. That's awesome.
I'll tag on, like, more generically. If anyone wants to dig in deep on these findings and where they came from and how they got found and what the relatively unfiltered conversation around them is, Taylor Bits did something wildly brave in that they just open sourced the repo they were using during the audit. So all the conversations are there on the issues, all the history is there on the docs and as they were edited. Like, if you want to go have a homework assignment, go dig through the Trail of Bits repo for this audit, because there's some nuggets of joy in there for sure.
Right.
I can imagine.
Yeah. So Amanda, that specific finding was one of the ones where I thought, that might be one that turns out to be juicy for someone who decides to take just that and pursue it for a couple of weeks and find that they end up with a nice bounty out of it.
Right.
Yeah, I was looking through. Not only did you find vulnerabilities specific to certain components, but you have a whole section dedicated to overarching issues, being like policies may not be applied. So Kubernetes allows users to define policies such as network or pod security policies to restrict access. However, policies are not always enforced or may fail silently. Is that when you mean they're not enforced and may fail silently, does that just mean they're not logged anywhere? And was that also a finding that logging was not at a sufficient level to allow for that?
I can speak to that one. So the issue is basically and they made a pattern out of it. But the issue was basically if you had they had two great examples. One was the pod security policies, and it definitely is the case if you take a Kubernetes cluster and it doesn't have the pod security policies, the admission controller, the thingy that actually is going to interpret those pod security policies and use them to decide what gets into your cluster and what isn't allowed to be staged into your cluster. If that thing isn't turned on, you can apply all the policies you want, and they won't get applied, and you won't realize that they're not getting applied. You won't realize that the security control that you put in isn't getting acted on until, I don't know, until maybe an attacker does it for, an attacker finds that for you, or you find it out, or maybe you never quite realize. And the same thing, I actually had personal experience with their other example, which is the Egress network rules. Like some of the CNIs, some of the networking, what do you call them, Aaron? The networking providers, overlay networking providers.
Great job, Jay.
Thanks. Some of the overlay network providers, like, they allow for you to have like ingress rules. You can say what's not allowed into your cluster, but you can't say what's not allowed out of your cluster. And so you can put rules that say, I'm only allowing this out of my cluster, and you'll have those rules and nothing will interpret them and turn them into IP tables rules. And you, again, won't realize it until it's just failing silently. And it's kind of worse than that on one of these, on the pod security policies, when you like read the how-tos on the Kubernetes and the Kubernetes documentation and tell you how to apply them. They say, okay, go put your pod security policies in place, and once you're done as your last step, activate the admission controller, activate the thing that actually is going to enforce them.
Which will either take down your whole cluster or do nothing at all. I have strong opinions about pod security policies, which I will rant on if given the opportunity. But on that finding generically, it made me remember that this audit is over like build your own Kubernetes. And most people don't build their own Kubernetes. They're going to pick a provider, right? They're going to use someone's flavor thereof. They're going to run on Amazon, they're going to run on Google, or they're going to run on Microsoft, and they're going to use whatever distribution of Kubernetes fits their needs. But we didn't want the audit to reflect any individual distribution. So some of these are going to apply more or less depending on what you're doing. For example, if you're different distributions will use different overlay networking providers who will have different network policy that can be applied. And some even have wrappers around pod security policy. So these findings, I think, are really valuable to the open source community on how to kind of close that gap a little bit. I mean, I roll my own Kubernetes at home, but I'm a huge nerd. If you're not, it's really, really hard.
Right.
In fact, I take that back. Even if you're a huge nerd, it's still really, really hard.
Is there somewhere on the line with like a matrix or something that would say, or was there somewhere else in the reports where it said, these vulnerabilities only exist in these flavors of Kubernetes versus others, or this is turned on by default in, the AWS version versus, the GCP version versus, whatever it is, whatever, DigitalOcean is using or whatever. Is there any documentation or matrix to show which is turned on or which is not turned on, or what needs to be enabled, or what is disabled?
I want to answer your question and also throw out kudos to somebody who did this once. There isn't that kind of documentation either in the results of this work or in the Kubernetes documentation. But one of the very first talks on how to do penetration tests against Kubernetes was by a guy named Brad Giesemann. And this was quite a while back. It was maybe 2 years back, which is a very long time in Kubernetes land. And he actually did a grid across both cloud providers and third party and distributions or installers, as it were, and said these are the places that have these settings. It'd be, I keep hoping that he or somebody else will do that kind of grid again and maybe make it a living document. And that's the hard part. Like you basically,
well, the problem is we hired him.
A living document because I know you did.
Oh.
I wasn't.
So it's no longer unbiased.
That was public. Yeah. Well, you contracted him. So anyway, but he did a great job. I'm really hoping somebody does this. The reason it's hard to do it is Kubernetes changes and the installer results change. So Kubernetes alone, just upstream, as the open source folks call it, does a new release every 3 months.
Okay.
So like there's a default that was in place when this audit started, that was no longer a default by the time the audit finished, and it was just like, okay, we're version locked. Aaron, do you want to talk about that at all?
About how we version locked the audit?
Well, even just about the speed at which Kubernetes changes, and so Aaron is the person who first drew my attention to the support period for Kubernetes when vulnerabilities come out. Like, you're getting a new release every 3 months.
Right.
Oh, wow.
I mean, you're just going to get me to give my pitch about how, like, if you run anything you care about on Kubernetes, the best thing you can do is stay up to date. There's a big security push behind Kubernetes. Myself and whatever team works at Google is large and passionate, and I know there's lots of other teams all over the place who are large and passionate about Kubernetes security, and we find bugs all the time and we fix them all the time, and the best way to find it is just grab the new version and pull it down. It is one of those places where being stable isn't necessarily good because it's iterating so fast. For this audit particularly, we did lock to a version because we didn't want to be chasing all of the fixes as they were coming in. So as soon as we published it, it was already a little bit out of date, but that seemed preferable to the rolling, ongoing audit that never ends. So we picked that approach.
Okay.
Well, as somebody I'm 3 time zones off of my normal on a Kubernetes pen test right now, and the big thing I'll say is, as much as it's for the open source folks, we might say, okay, well, the results came out and they're for a version that's one or two versions back from the absolute most current. On tons of our penetration tests, we're looking at Kubernetes clusters that are a year old, and thus, by definition, very often end of life, and aren't getting patches for the newest stuff.
Yeah, I mean, GKE specifically, we're N-2, right? So we're not going to be giving you a bunch of patches if you fall too far behind.
And that was the end of part 1 with our discussion with Jay Beale and Aaron Small from GKE. Jay, of course, from the Guardian's security consultancy, and we were discussing the recent security audit conducted by Jay and Aaron and Red Hat and Trail of Bits and Atreides Partners. So it was very much a concerted and collaborative effort there. Next week we'll have more on this, and if you are interested, you can definitely reach out to Jay on Twitter at jbeale, Jaybeale. You can hit Aaron Smalls at Atlas Hugged, so you can do a search for Atlas Hugged on Twitter. The organizers of Hack in the Box Dubai hit us up asking us to mention that they have a conference going on in the United Arab Emirates. So they have Hack in the Box Dubai. I think they have Amsterdam, which is the one we mentioned last year in 2020. But this year it's in Emirates Palace in Abu Dhabi, not Abu Dhabi. 12 through 17 August 2019, and this is part of the United Arab Emirates Cyber Week. So that was quite an interesting little deal there. One of the things I wanted to mention when you go to a Hack in the Box conference, and this one is a bit further away for folks in the U.S., but it's definitely worth the trip. You can get 2 days of cutting-edge technical training sessions, 2-day dual or triple PEC security conference featuring multiple keynote speakers. They have a 2-day capture the flag live hacking, attack, and defense competition. They have an 8-hour or 24-hour developer hackathon. And they also have a ComSec, Village, and Technology Showcase area. So there's a ton of stuff to do at these events. So if that interests you, you definitely want to get out and take a look at that. And you can go to conference.hitb.org and find out more information on the site there. They also have several other events that look like they're coming up as well, so you can check those out. All right, so that was it for the week. Thank you to our Patreon supporters. Their help, even as little as $1, helps with hosting efforts for Libsyn, time and effort putting out a weekly show, as well as the Zoom that we pay for CTF Club, Sim Club meetings, book clubs, which we're still doing the book club stuff. We just interviewed one of the authors of Mastermind, or the author of Mastermind, I believe, in the last couple of weeks. So if you're interested in that, you can join us on Slack by sending us a DM to Breaksec, BRAKESEC, or send an email to bds.podcast@gmail.com. And you can join our Slack. We have a great community there, and you'll definitely learn a lot. And we absolutely want contributors or people to help out and mentor and do whatever. So we definitely have a collaborative effort there. Ms. Berlin can be found at InfoSyster, INFOSYSTIR, or you can follow her at her nonprofit organization, Hackers Health, on Twitter, which is Hackers Health. And Mr. Betcher does LogMD, Windows forensic tool for making sure that your logs are being done properly on all your Windows environments. And also he's working on a hunting portion that will look for artifacts across your enterprise. So if you're interested in looking at that, you can go to log-md.com, or you can follow him on Twitter at BetcherPwned, BOETTCHERPWNED. So I think that's you can follow me on Twitter at Brian Brake, BRYANBRAKE. And we have a TeePublic store. So if you want a t-shirt for with a logo, if you don't want to give to the Patreon, we do get a little kickback from the t-shirts. So you can go to teepublic.com/user/BDS podcast, all one word. And our Patreon is patreon.com/BDS_podcast. So you can go and check that out. Or there's a link in the show notes to all of the links that we've mentioned today. So, all right, everyone, have a great week. Be nice to one another. Take care of yourselves, because the only you have. And we'll talk to you again soon.